Sweet redemption, I will never let you down. Will it ever get funny? Oh, I wonder, honey, baby, how you make me sway. You say you will, I'm calling your addictive brand. You say you will, yeah, I'm crossing the obsessive line.
Happy Saturday, all. You are at the virtual happy hour with myself. I'm David, the producer, and this is Juliet Miranda. And you want to say hi?
Well, hey there, y'all. Happy Saturday. Hope you're doing well.
It's a good weekend. The weather's nice. People are out and about. This is a good thing.
I know, and I'm glad the calliope, as they call it here in New Orleans, has finally died down a little bit. We can always hear that filtering and bouncing off the walls in our studio. So
yeah, we certainly can.
They thoughtfully ended it just when we went live.
Yeah, and we have a lot of people already joined us here in the chat. We got Kim, we got Bob, we have Great Gamer, we have Gary, we have Marion, we have just a whole slew of people. It's all going by so fast that I can't see them all.
Well, thanks for being here, y'all. We're going to do our best to try and get to your questions in the chat during the show. We're going to be speaking with someone I am really, really excited about.
This is a big deal for us because, well, one, not only are we just fans, but we were kindly connected through a mutual friend of Kim to this gentleman, and he is actor Robert LaSardo. So you know him from films like Waterworld, The Mule with Clint Eastwood. You've seen him in his own starring role in a movie called Parlor. But you know him from TV roles as well as Escobar and Nip and Tuck, which is one of our favorites, by the way. Yeah. I have to throw that out there. And CSI Miami, NYPD Blue, a whole bunch of great roles that Robert's been a part of.
Now, if you have any questions for Robert, put them in the chat. We're going to do our best to get to them. Sometimes it can be a little hard. The chat rolls by pretty quickly, and we like to get deep into conversations. So we promise we will do our best to get to them.
So let's bring up Robert.
Let's bring up Robert.
Robert, how are you?
Hello.
Great to see you, and great to have you as part of the show. So happy Saturday to you.
Thanks for having me. And also want to shout out to Kim for facilitating our connection here, because without her, that bridge would not have been built for either one of us to cross. So thank
exactly.
you.
Absolutely. We totally appreciate that.
Yeah, she's in the chat, so she's hearing this directly. So thank you, Kim. And I still don't know the connection between you two, but maybe you can get into that later. she just said, hey, would you love to have Robert on your show? I'm like, of course I'd like to have Robert on my show. Are you kidding me? That'd be wonderful. So thank you again, Kim, and appreciate you shouting her out too, Robert. That was very nice of you.
Kindred spirits.
Right, right. So we had a call just a few days back, and you know, we were on the phone for I think somewhere around like 45 minutes, and just gotten some pretty deep philosophical conversations. But you know, it's interesting that obviously you have this no BS attitude. How does a person like you not only survive but thrive in a place like Hollywood?
I take vacations quite often.
Well, and right now you're probably in a self-imposed one. What's going on with the whole acting career as it relates to COVID? This is a weird time.
Yeah, it is a challenging time. It's a very strategic type of practice, regardless of plagues and other things that come about to create more obstacles in an industry or business that's very difficult. That being said, I guess the quick answer is I'm grateful that despite what the landscape suggests, I'm still working.
That's great. How long have you been back to work?
I don't know the exact date that I got on a plane. I left Washington State to fly to Las Vegas to start a film called Bloodthirst. I think it was February maybe. And I think there was maybe 5 people on the plane. So we shot one day of this film, directed by Max Searchy and Michael Sue, and produced by Michael Mahal, Sonny Mahal. They were gracious enough to allow that circumstance to manifest for one day until they were shut down, unfortunately. So we're able to get some of that in the can. Then I think it was maybe, I don't know, a month and a half ago, I flew to Florida to work on a film called Mind Games, starring Michael Pere, myself. So in the midst of all of this, I've still been traveling around as the guidelines allow me and the authorities permit me. I guess the rest is in my lap in terms of the risk factor.
Right. And it's interesting because when I went through, IMDb, and it always shows, what's in all these various stages of productions, that you have 32 projects right now that are in various degrees of production. I mean, that's got to be amazing to juggle, especially in a circumstance that we're in today.
Yeah. My feeling about all of this, it may sound reckless to some, that regardless of what reason suggests, I feel that I have to be present and take the kind of risks that maybe the most logical minds would think that are reckless and a bit, I guess dangerous considering what we face. But to me, I think to be still too long and to be reflective in a world that seems to be very fixated on fear consciousness is also extremely dangerous and can be fatal in terms of what the spirit requires. So I think it's important to be responsible as we go out into the world, face the challenges that we always face, and then utilize healthy discretion and listen to the authorities, so to speak, as far as how we can function. For me, not to function. And a self-imposed exile doesn't make much sense unless it's for spiritual reasons. I mean, I think it was Richard Grieco who said to me, actor friend of mine, said, "Robert, I've been practicing social distancing for 15 years. So for some of us who are kind of private in the way we live, being cloistered in isn't something unusual. But having the choice to go out is the variable, I think, that makes all the difference. It makes it monastic as opposed to a prison. And so I don't want to embrace the prison thinking, to lock myself up in a fear and insecurity or whatever that doesn't allow the imagination to thrive, the possibility of weathering the storm and collaborating with other people, to get things done in a responsible, healthy way. What's the point otherwise? Right.
Yes, and it's when you want to create, and we've felt the same way. And one of the reasons why we started this show in the first place was actually due to COVID. That we said we want to still embrace and have a deeper connection with our audience. So we put together a secondary show. Now, obviously, we do this remote, and it doesn't incur a lot of risk, but it's amazing to see. We've talked to artists and musicians
well, what I find fascinating is that we've had these connections with people, and I think in a way these times that we're in have actually inspired people to be considerably more creative in how they communicate than ever before. A lot of the musicians we know, they're doing live shows on Facebook or on Instagram. I think it's actually kind of remarkable the way people still find a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. The spirit, for some, depending, there's a lot of brave spirits out there.
Right.
Very true.
Brave spirits, So some, I think would thrive I talked to a filmmaker friend of mine, Josh Weber, and we were talking about this. How do you feel about all this, Josh? And he said to me, he said, "It's the wild, wild west, LaSardo. I thrive with the chaos." So, and he's the director of the film that you fascinated by somewhat in terms of what the trailer suggests, the film Isaac. And so he lives in a kind of Josh is a very intense, lovable, but also I think there's an aspect of the psyche that is tempestuous. And so he feels very at home in this unsettling atmosphere. And some of us always do, because I think our disposition is akin to that. So it's nothing new.
So speaking of Isaac, you did send us the trailer, and when we watched it, we thought, wow, this is a super intense movie.
Absolutely.
That looks like it's going to be a great understanding of a character development as you see the whole movie, obviously. But what can you tell us about it, and what kind of drew you to that project?
The story. Yeah, I read the story and I was affected by it. The lead character, Isaac, is this young man who's grows up in a circumstance that's very tortured, and the people that he meets along the way in this kind of conundrum of physics, of emotion, and abuse, to me are familiar characters. I don't know what that says about my life, but I can relate to the material. And there's something very endearing about it, despite some of the I don't know, the violence that the story exposes in this young man's life. There's a love affair present, and I think from the point of view of the reader or the audience, you don't quite know if it's something that is relevant in reality or just something that is been contrived for the sake of sanity from the point of view of Isaac as he deals with this insistent torment of people he meets along the way, people from the past, people in his present timeline. This character, Greg, that I portray, who owns this liquor store and market that Isaac frequents, has this relentless dialogue with Isaac, or this kind of bullying patterning that either kind of defines their relationship, but you get the sense that there may or may not be a history with these two. And it's one of those stories where it's a mystery thriller, psychological thriller. So at the risk of giving some of the turning points away, I have to be careful about how I speak in terms of the relationship dynamic and who these people are. But to bring it home, I felt very fortunate to be involved with a cast like this. RJ Mitty plays Isaac. Dove Cameron is one of the leads in it, female lead in it, and I play this character, Greg. And I thought the character development, as it was written in the script, provided an opportunity for me, unlike some of the other movies I participated, where I could dive deeper into a history in relationship to characters around me, one in particular being Isaac. So despite the material being somewhat tortured and dark, I felt there was aspects to it that were brilliant in terms of a case study, character study about a young man who goes through hell basically in his younger life, and how he deals with this as a man, and what that damage or how that damage can manifest. So yeah, I thought I still feel that it's an opportunity to grow as an artist. And with someone like Josh Weber, who directed this film, and based on the trailer alone, I can tell that he's moving into a situation of genius. I think every artist gets to a point in their career where they reach this apex potentially depending on what position of creativity in the profession they hold, they reach a point where there's a shift of evolution. And I've witnessed it with Josh, and I'm just grateful that he invited me into this situation.
Looking at that sort of shift of evolution, do you feel that you've hit that in your career, or are you still progressing?
I don't know. Yeah, well, I don't know if that ever ends. I think there's levels of there's certainly levels that in experience within the workplace that demonstrate that the people that are writing the material for you are allowing you room to grow within the structures of their imagination that they build around you or in collaboration with others. So yeah, within the last 4 to 5 years, I've seen a paradigm shift in the work order that's been offered to me.
I find it interesting looking at a lot of the characters that you've played. You take on these very complex characters, and I think there's sort of an incorrect hesitation to call them, you know, the classic bad guy. You have a really interesting way of pulling out the humanity in a character. How do you do that? Is there a way that you can describe that process of how you go into a character?
If I don't have actual experience in my memory banks in relationship to the material, then I rely on imagination. I utilize the imagination to fill in the blanks. And I think that's key. That's where the craft comes into play. Meaning, you know, what my teachers in various acting schools that I've attended taught me to utilize. And I think it's important to feed the imagination through study. And also the process that you asked me about involves reading the material, reading the script, reading the story. And as you read it, hopefully if it's written well, and there's a point that speaks to something that's not just a carbon copy or a derivative of something else that's been written, if it's an original story or embraces characters as they really function in interpersonal settings in life, that places maybe ordinary people in extraordinary circumstance, there's an opportunity to dive deep into the writing if it's substantial enough to build from what is on the page times your own experience plus your imagination. So I utilize various methods to create this house to live in for a while.
Let's talk about the writing a little bit, because you yourself, you've authored 3 books, one being obviously your memoir. You've done a photography poetry book, and the last one is actually a work of fiction. You've kind of worked around a lot of the realm of different writing. Have you ever given consideration to writing scripts or, you know, writing your own movie?
Yes, I have. The book that you mentioned, Gabriel's Trial, which is the title of the book, it's a fiction, and it came about because of a script that I wrote, something that I needed to get out. It was cathartic. I needed to, you know, allow myself to experience my own heart and some of these, I guess, insights that we all pick up along the way about life in general. And I think I've had a wealth of opportunity to learn from other writers, from directors and storytelling, to see if there's something that I could also contribute that suggests intelligence, insight, and maybe reclamation as far as a character in the center that experiences a conflict very similar to what I have to deal with in the work order of imagination that is built around me in the frame by others. I thought, well, what do I have to say within the midst of the frame that is more consistent with the truth, that speaks to something dynamic and something honest and something loving? So I came up with Gabriel's Trial. I wrote it in a script format, and then I thought, well, if I can't get the movie produced, I'll write it as a book. I'll have some photographs taken. So I hired an illustrator. So it's kind of an illustrated novel type thing. And so that's, yeah, I felt that that was useful to feel. I think all artists need to feel at some point, especially if you kind of feel a weight of yoke and not be of this kind of tyranny that sometimes can hold you hostage based on what corporate or mainstream entertainment requires. And I'm not knocking it. It does require a very specific formula for sales in the marketplace. And if you're not cut out or perceived by those doing the hiring, then you have to figure out a way to build a stage for your own story and allow that to breathe, so you don't feel somehow you've been done a terrible injustice by the man or someone else. You take the power back by building your own story situation, and then, you know, see what goes from there. But I think it's very fulfilling to do this. I think any artist, real artist, would appreciate and relate to the need to create something independent, thus, you know, independent film, create something independent from what the corporation and the companies dictate.
Right.
Was that your motivation in doing your memoir? Because prior to that, you'd been acting, and moving into your memoir, you talk about self-identity quite a bit. Was that more of a way for you to kind of step back into yourself and away from these other roles that you've been playing?
Yes. And also, you know, I'll keep it less, I'll make it less ethereal. I wrote the memoir as a response to people asking me questions over the years about the tattoos, life history, the genesis of my acting career. What's it like being a tattooed actor? What's it like being in the military? What was it like? Many questions have come across the table at various conventions I would attend, or appearances where I would be in, you know, face to face with fans who wanted to know. And I thought, you know what, let me finally answer these questions in a book. So the book is a confession. It's it was a way to come to terms with my my shit. You know, it was, yeah, in that sense, it was a way to face that and be honest with people about what it, from this point of view, what the Hollywood, because people I think are very taken with this idea of Hollywood or the promised land or the land of Oz and what happens behind the magical door curtain. So I wanted to, in a way, dispel the myth, not because of bitterness, but because of a responsibility I felt to share with people I think have a true connection with what they think I represent as the pariah, the tattooed freak guy. I know they don't lay that label, but I think the industry would suggest that that label, kind of like the Charlie Manson nefarious monster in the cage that occasionally is let out to do bidding for the sake of whatever agenda, then has to go back into the cage. So because of this perception, I think it was necessary to deal with that idea and kind of dispel it by saying to the reader, hey, look, this is what it was really like for me, and risk taking the mask off so that they could see that something that would either horrify them or fall out of love with me, or maybe feel a closer connection to something that they could identify with, similar to what they identify with on the screen. You know, friends or people would say, hey, Robert, I got my first tattoo because of you. Thank you for tattooing yourself and taking the pie in the face in mainstream media, because for those of us who are always taking the pie in the face, suffering the humiliation of being different in a very conventional minded society, you stepped forward without a gimmick before it was cool and just showed up. And I think those people really are paying attention to how this thing operates, wanted to know, man, hey, what was that about? So life sentence, which felt like a life sentence in jail, thus the title, my memoirs, Life Sentence. It's a play on words, you know, life sentence, my life story, sentences about my life, but also this sense of incarceration built around me within the framework of minds who saw an opportunity to exploit something. And then I saw an opportunity to simply make a living. So there's no harm, no foul. I'm grateful for the opportunities.
Yeah,
and I'm grateful for the book. And
Yeah,
I'm glad
and
people read it. And if they're
that's
affected,
awesome.
it's great.
Yeah, and life sentence, as you mentioned, it's kind of multi-layered, and what it means to you and what it should mean to the reader. But your background as a child, and you and I actually talked about this on the call, is that we both have something very similar in common, which is we both grew up without fathers. And when we started talking about that, I found it extremely interesting, your philosophy on raising children and what that should look like. Would you mind going into that?
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much because I don't want to bore your audience to death. So I will quote a saying that I heard. The best parents are the worst parents, and the worst parents are the best. That's a thought in the mind of one person. Some would say that's not true. I would say it's a truth for some, meaning that the worst parents allow you to kind of figure it out on yourself. Now, the patriarch that I was faced with in biological form was present to some extent, but also communicated to me some real hardline fundamentals, which was that, listen, here's the deal. I'm not going to console you. I'm not going to put my arms around you. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be okay, because it probably won't be. You're going to learn how to be your own mother and father. And so I was kind of placed on that road with some tools given to me by that one and other surrogate fathers along the road who appeared by divine chance to instruct me about what was necessary to survive, along with the matriarch, this idea of mother along the road, to also give me the bosom, so to speak, to feel a sense of intimacy, because I was denied that. Some of us have been denied that, not to build a hallmark around it or a pity party or to play the violin, but to simply learn something. So I think that in my case, not for everyone, that the worst parents are the best, because it opens you up to the tribe of man and woman, so to speak, to learn from lots of different people and take the hits along the way. Now, granted, some people take hits that throw them off their axis without guidance from a mother or a father or someone to warn them about the dire road ahead if they don't detour to the right instead of the left. So I am fortunate that there have been whisperings throughout time to warn me of the peril of bad choice. But I've still ended up in the clutches of circumstance where I was handcuffed. I was in a police car. I was doing violence. I was on the edge of ruin. And then I was pulled back by a voice that said, hey, go to the stage, LaSardo. Utilize your ability as an artist to find catharsis in a drama that does not involve the end of your life with others. So that's where performing is crucial for me. That's where acting, the movies, teachers, and efforts involved in surveying the performing arts saved my life and was required. That was my synagogue, my temple, my church. That saved.
Well, in junior high school, you referenced your English teacher as one of the people that kind of saw you were struggling and kind of, got you, at least started into the acting. But it was, I believe, when you were at the High School for Performing Arts that you ran into a gentleman that you became very good friends with, that you kind of credit to saving you and your direction of where you went.
Yeah, he was pivotal. Anthony Abeson was pivotal, and I think still is, because he lives on in the memory banks and manifests manifests periodically and says hello, so yeah, he was crucial at that time for me.
Yeah. Now, we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about some of the things that you have loved in movies and have mentioned in the past, which you're a big fan of 70s movies, from what we understand.
Yes.
We love the 70s movies. I mean, geez, you could name all the great actors and all the great directors and everything that has been made in that time. Do you think that why 70s movies are so great is based on the writing and directing styles, or do you think it's just something that's missing, like a little bit of that magic in today's movies?
I think, yeah, it's a tough one. In those days, in the 70s, audiences, I think, read more, and they had patience to allow stories to develop, characters to develop. And because of that, I think what you witnessed was more substantial. And I'm not an expert in the politic play of the movie industry of that time, but my guess is that the creative power was present with the money power, meaning that the decisions that were made in terms of how it was going to go, meaning the genesis of the film, the casting of the film, the writing, the editorial, the cinematography, all of it was also witnessed and governed by creative entities that allowed things to manifest and were not bullied by the politics of the money consciousness, the money mind, the bankers who surround the industry with fear and say, no, this is not going to sell. No, he's too old. She's too old. We have to cast younger. We need to sell this. I think it was less about selling and more about conveying the true aspect of the art in conjunction with a formula to sell still to the people, because you have to sell the product. But I think it was a balanced marriage in what was required. And so maybe that's why directors like William Friedkin, Spielberg in those days, Brian De Palma, Scorsese, prior to the other stuff, in the genesis of that, Terrence Malick. There's so many of these incredible filmmakers that were not afraid to push the envelope. Stanley Kubrick, did things in film and said things through characters that were considered taboo. So yeah, I think that it was a different time, and certain practices clearly were allowed that aren't allowed now. And I think they're not allowed now. Fast forward to the 21st century, I think it has a lot to do with the marketplace and the audience who have been trained over the years. Woody Allen said something significant in his film Annie Hall that came out in the 70s, another brilliant filmmaker.
Great movie.
He said, he made this reference in the movie Annie Hall to that the audiences were systematically having their standards lowered over the years, and to the point where mediocrity seemed to be auspicious and fabulous and fantastic, and yet it was garbage. But they didn't know the difference because they were being trained to react to things that were substandard through manipulation of that medium. That's what he said. I didn't say that.
Right.
He said.
Right. But it makes a lot of sense, though.
Huh?
It makes a tremendous amount of sense, though. Just the industry training training viewers on what to watch and how to watch things. Obviously we're going through that today where Netflix is a huge thing, and that's where now people want to go watch stuff. People obviously want to go back to the movie theaters when they open back up, but they're kind of being trained on how to watch material, but also being trained on the kind of material to watch by what they put out.
Yeah, I'll ask you a question, both of you, Juliet and David. What do you think that suggests?
I think it suggests that, on the creation side, I think it suggests that it's about the dollar, that they're trying to make as much out of a product as they possibly can, where creativity was a little bit more important, I think, back in 70s, and I'll even say some 80s movies, that creativity had a stronger hold. And that's why I think the indie movie genre has been and really blown up. It's because people, I think, still are thirsty for long format stories, for deep characters, for hard to necessarily watch kinds of material in some cases. Look at the horror movies. I think some that just create the jump scares and do the the simple tropes are not really what people,
It's
I think,
not
in horror want to
about
watch.
developing an emotion. And I
Right.
think there's an inclination to blame technology and that it's desensitizing people. I actually think, especially with indie films, that there's an incredible empowerment to the availability of technology now, so that people can actually go out and make their own movies and they can tell their own stories, because storytelling never dies. And you keep coming back to the idea of a great story. And that's something that we're going to have forever. And I love that people now have more of a capability to harness that power.
Right.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Juliet. It's made a world of difference, specifically in the realm of independent films for me, because those writers, those directors, those producers, their vision is much more dynamic in terms of what they see and what they allow. And someone like me, at one point, who was perceived a certain way by the framework of corporate industry, who was not allowed to participate in certain type of storytelling, is now being invited into situations that I thought would never be possible. So bravo to the truly independent films and directors and writers that take kind of risks that they would not allow or sanction within the mainstream. Absolutely.
I think a great example of that is the two gentlemen that you worked with on Parlor, that they
Yes.
wrote that movie with you, not just wrote it and, you know, offered it to you, but they wrote it with you in mind. I mean, they wrote the character around what the perception is of you and what they knew and understood about you at the time.
And about the art.
And about the art, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It showed me what was possible. It was, that to me was the beginning of the shift. Parlor, Devin Downs and Kenny Gage handing me something to look at, discussing their modus operandi, their perceptions, sharing their ideologies and what they felt in terms of positioning for Robert LaSardo in this realm of this physics of entertainment. They said, "You're not a character actor, Robert." Kenny Gage says, "I don't see you as a character actor. You're going to be the leading man in this film. And not only are you going to be the lead, you're going to go through this story unscathed. You're not going to end up in a cage. You're not going to be, your legs aren't going to be chopped off 3/4 through the race. You're going to be allowed to fulfill something, to communicate a point within the realm of horror, you know, because horror is horror, right? So there's certain aspects to that storytelling that are a bit bleak and extreme, but necessary to sell that, you know, product. But it was a beginning for me to recognize what was possible in terms of being the lead in a film. And I saw an opportunity. Some challenged the film and looked at it, you know, for the obvious elements that make certain types of horror effective, and said, why would you participate in something that demonizes this notion of tattoo? And I respond, I say, I saw an opportunity to portray a character that had moments of flight in terms of insight that was allowed in the dialogue, which normally isn't allowed. So if you're looking for perfection, forget it. Meaning that anyone who would ask that question doesn't understand that there's always a trade-off. You know, you gain something, then maybe you lose something else. This idea of a perfect situation where all the stars line up supposedly, and everything that ideally should manifest within story, the character, the writing, is suddenly realized, is occasionally apparent. And maybe that's why some movies are championed at the Sundance Festival or notable festivals, because there's a moment in time where a film strikes every chord and does everything that people imagine a film should do on all levels, which is a rare occurrence, you know, I think.
Right.
And I think every artist hopes one day to be present in a film that on many levels has a universal impact, regardless of genre, where people go, wow, did you just see that? Did you see that? Yeah, I saw it. Woo. And, you know, that's the thing that I think artists yearn for, not to covet it and to make it a trophy or to go to some promised land with it, but to know that in a lifetime, you're able to participate in a collaboration where a certain genius was achieved by all, as opposed to falling down into mediocrity where, oh, it had so much potential, but, you know, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of that. A lot of artists have to bear the burden of it almost rang the bell, but it didn't. And so you have to continue to go along the road without judgment, without evaluation of yourself or anything, and look at every opportunity as that. And just do your best, realizing that ultimately you have no control over the result, and let it be, and just continue and continue.
So you've been in just about every kind of genre of films. You've been in comedies, you've been in thrillers, horror, drama. I mean, everything that I could pretty much think of. Do you have one that you really gravitate towards, or that you really want to focus on in the next kind of evolution in your career?
Well, for the sake of the yearbook or the old photo album, let's just say that I remember a time, because you mentioned comedy, the first thing that occurs is a film with Richard Pryor called Moving, which demonstrated what was possible for a young man, this guy at the time, to be playing opposite of the iconic movie star, legend, sensitive, sweet man, tortured man, endearing man, Richard Pryor. He kind of took me aside, he did take me aside, and whispered things in my ear when we filmed this studio movie in the 80s that I needed to hear, that assisted me with realizing what was possible. Now, what management did with that and what the agency did with that is something different. I'll give you a quick story, then I'll get to the answer. A producer named Stuart Kornfeld, who's produced a lot of the Ben Stiller movies and had quite an alliance with Ben Stiller for a while, was some of the humble beginnings of people like this. Alan Metter, who was the director, who directed a film called Back to School, who directed this film that I was in with Richard Pryor called Moving. Anyway, Stuart Kornfeld said some things to me about, listen, I don't know what's going on with your agent, but Warner Brothers just offered you a 3-picture deal because they're so impressed with what you're doing in this comedy that we don't care about the tattoos. We want to give you a contract. Agency said, nah, let's wait. I don't want you to lock you up in a situation where you can't compete for other things. And I thought, okay, I didn't know. I was green, my first film. Right. And in retrospect, I thought, well, compete for what? I look at this now, I go, compete for what? Mugger number 1, skinhead number 2. That's what I would inevitably compete for. So Stuart Kornfeld, this notable producer in Hollywood, who now is, this kind of landmark in terms of reference point for me, said twice, listen, I don't want to get into your business, LaSardo, but I don't know if your agent realizes how talented you are. Like, he probably could not understand or get his mind around why the agent was turning down a 3-picture deal with Warner Brothers. He didn't understand that. So anyway, jump to the question. So yeah, I think that my acting teacher, Anthony Abeson, is always lamenting with me when it comes to no matter anything I do. Because regardless of the flights I may take periodically that are allowed by writers and producers to perform in ways that are not normally sanctioned, he says, I saw it, I love it, but Robert, I want to see you in a romantic comedy, and I want to see you win the girl. That's his nudge, him nudging me, And I say, yeah, that would be nice, Anthony. So yeah, I mean, it would be kind of cool to show up in a Ben Stiller movie or any kind of film where there's some quirky comedy antics, because I'm a bit neurotic too, and I've always been a fan of Woody Allen, Ben Stiller, and all those guys. And so why not appear in a mythology that I grew up watching and that I have an affection for? But, sometimes it's, to quote a movie, a black and white film, Montgomery Clift, Burt Lancaster, the film was called From Here to Eternity. And I think it was Donna Reed said to Montgomery Clift's character, he was an army guy in this film, and he was being abused by the hierarchy politics of the army. And she said, why do you love the army so much? I mean, you've given your life to this thing, and they're so cruel to you. They mistreated you. They don't even appreciate you. And he said, hey, when you love something, you have to be grateful. So I'm grateful, So I thought, well, okay, there it is. So regardless of how this thing plays itself out, I'm still grateful for so many of the producers and directors that have stepped forward in the last few years that have allowed me to play a military guy allowed me to play characters that I thought would never be conceived of with someone who wears a particular kind of, you know, suit and tie, so to speak.
Well, and please tell me you're not working with that agent anymore. Yeah, that must have been a tough one. Wow, that's
Which one? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Please tell me what. I didn't hear the last thing. What?
Oh, I just said that you know, hopefully that you're not working with that agent any longer.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, hey, you know, you live and learn.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
Live and learn. Even a broken clock tells the time correctly twice a day. So he was advantageous at that time in linking me to something that without him wouldn't have even materialized. So in a sense, he
That's a
was
good point.
necessary to provide me with a circumstance where I could be told that.
But you always seem to have that, and you know, I haven't known you that long, obviously, Robert, but you have that spiritual side. It's like things happen for a reason. Things, you know, progress because, you know, I'm doing these right things, or, you know, doing or shifting the way that I am learning as a person. You seem to have that spiritual side. You bring, well, I shouldn't say do you bring it. I know you will be bringing it when the movie comes out, The Talking Tree.
Well, thank you for seeing a quality in me that I don't always recognize myself, but it means a lot to me, and I don't negate it. I think that's something I continually each day to strive for in terms of a relationship to people, life, and the material, the work that suggests that type of evolution, so that when they ask me to play a role like in The Talking Tree, there can be moments that that require humility and a vulnerability that people can believe, because for so long, I think LaSardo, or the tattooed guy, you know, ooh, something bad is going to happen. Something, ooh, he's up, you know, there's this reaction to what that indicates maybe. So the real challenge now is, right, to, instead of scaring the audience or intimidating the audience or thrilling the audience, now it's about, well, how can you move the audience to feel something sensitive and endearing that points to sympathy for your character, because you're involved in a circumstance with another man where you're helping him. It's not about the ruination of things, it's the assistance to life, not the destruction of life, but the building of a life. So the story encompasses that. It's a story of reclamation. A man decides to rob a bank because his mother cannot afford to pay for the medicine. And so he's convicted for armed robbery. He's given a sympathetic sentence because of the circumstances. He meets my character in jail. I help guide him away from some of the dark tendencies that possess every man in a prison situation, and promise him that on Christmas Day, we will see his mother before she passes, and you will have that moment to tell her you love her. And so this was necessary to communicate in a believable way.
Right.
And I think that without everything that's happened in terms of life, the fiction that I appear in repeatedly, that, what is the saying? Milton, long is the way and hard that out of hell leads up to light. So there had to be a series of experiences to recognize divinity. Yes, to recognize divinity within the fiction, so that that could be authenticated in a realistic way, so that people would feel something and be moved to cry or moved to smile, moved to whatever, but something that's auspicious and not the degradation of humanity, but the celebration of life.
Yeah, that's great, and we're looking forward to seeing that movie as well. And by the way, with both Isaac and The Talking Tree, I didn't see release dates on either of those yet. Are you aware of them yet?
No, I'm not in terms of Isaac, but my guess is 2021. With The Talking Tree, it's ambiguous, but my sense is, because it's a holiday type film, that will be released probably, hopefully, before this Christmas at the year 2020.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I would hope so.
Yeah, those are great. And Robert, you've been just such an amazing guest here. We can't thank you enough for the time that you've taken with us, and taking us through your journey as an actor, and isn't just as a person. That the one thing I always try to get out of the interviews that we do is just that what personal growth things can we take away from other people's experiences, and you're definitely inspirational.
Yeah. As a writer, just hearing the way that you approach your work and you approach your own personal connection to it is absolutely inspiring.
Thank you, Juliet. I'm glad that you feel that way.
Yeah. And so thank you, Robert. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you, by the way, for everyone in the chat. Everyone's been sending you tons of love, by the way.
Yes,
so
I've actually seen several people say that they definitely want to see you in a romantic comedy.
Yes.
So.
That'll have to be next on your list, Robert.
Yeah. In the meantime, we'll give them action thrill rides. In the meantime,
Right.
August 28th, they can see me get it on with some aliens. I'm in a film called Attack of the Unknown, directed by Brandon Slagle, scheduled for release this summer. It's called Attack of the Unknown, and I'm very excited about it because I don't want to give the impression that the other thing is somehow less than. It provides opportunities for a certain audience to enjoy spaceships coming out of the sky and that type of story too. So there's something for everyone, and I recognize what a dynamic audience there is. And as many people are watching today, they're probably within that group of people specific proclivity for various types of entertainment. So one is no greater than the other. They're all equal in what they suggest for audiences that need a variety of things. So
and it's also great. Yeah, it's also great that different audiences that wouldn't necessarily watch the other kinds of material find you that way and get to see more of your body of work.
Agreed. So It's all, as they say, it's all good.
It's all good.
Robert, have yourself a great rest of the weekend, and thank you again for coming on. I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the audience. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Cheers, y'all.
Cheers, y'all.